Most folks picture every cowboy in the Old West packing a Colt or a Winchester rifle. That's what the movies always show, and that's what a lot of people still believe today. But the real story is way more interesting, and it stretches across the whole world. Turns out, the frontier actually ran on guns imported from overseas. From 1865 to 1895, the American West was still wide open and pretty wild. Settlers, ranchers, lawmen, and even outlaws all needed guns to protect themselves from bandits, wild animals, and all the other dangers out there on the edge of civilization. Sure, Colt and Winchester were really popular, but they cost a lot and there just weren't enough of them to go around. So where did everyone else get their firearms? A ton came from Europe. Factories in Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, and Spain shipped thousands and thousands of guns to American ports like San Francisco and New Orleans. Some even got smuggled over the Mexican border to avoid extra taxes. And plenty of those guns ended up right in the hands of everyday working cowboys who rode the trails day after day. Starting with number 5, here's a tough little gun that came all the way from across the ocean and built up a scary reputation in a tiny package. The Webby British Bulldog hit the scene in 1872, made by Philip Webby and Son in Birmingham, England. It was a snub-nosed, double-action revolver that held 5 rounds. You could get it in .44 Webby or 450 Adams, plus a few other calibers. The barrel measured only about 2.5 inches, so the whole gun was roughly 6 inches long. That made it small enough to slip into a coat pocket or a saddlebag without anyone noticing. And on the frontier, that kind of thing mattered a lot. Cowboys running into rustlers, getting into bar fights, or facing sudden trouble on the trail needed something they could grab quickly and shoot even faster. The Bulldog's double-action trigger meant you could fire without having to cock the hammer by hand every single time. That was a big step up from single-action Colts where you had to thumb the hammer back between shots. It only weighed a little over a pound when empty and sold for about $9 to $15 in catalogs, so regular working guys could actually afford one. General George Armstrong Custer supposedly carried a pair of Webby RIC revolvers, a close relative of the Bulldog, during his campaigns. In 1881, Charles Guiteau used a .44 caliber Belgian-made Bulldog to assassinate President James Garfield, which shows just how far these guns had spread across America by then. Stagecoach guards carried them, outlaws tucked them into their belts, and ranchers kept one by the bed. The Southern Pacific Railroad even handed out British Bulldogs to its workers all the way until 1895. The short barrel meant it wasn't very accurate beyond about 10 yards, and .44 Webby ammo was harder to find in most frontier towns than .45 Colt rounds. Those were real downsides, but they didn't stop the Bulldog from becoming one of the most common pocket revolvers in the entire American West. Factories all over Europe, especially in Belgium, made copies of it, and those knockoffs traveled even farther than the real ones. Number 4 comes from a place most people never connect to the Wild West, Belgium. The Liège region was one of the biggest gun-making hubs in the world back in the 1800s. Belgian factories cranked out cheap copies of popular American revolvers, selling them for half the price of Colts or Remingtons, or even less. These knockoffs looked a lot like the Colt single-action Army and the Remington 1875. A typical one had a 7.5-inch barrel, held 6 shots, weighed around 2.5 pounds, and came chambered in .44-40. They carried Belgian proof marks, like the Liège LG Star, and you could find them in Montgomery Ward and Sears catalogs listed as solid, affordable options. They usually went for $5 to $8. That price made a huge difference because the average cowboy on a cattle drive only earned about $30 a month. A real Colt peacemaker could cost half a month's pay or more. A Belgian copy let you get the job done for way less. U.S. Customs records from 1870 to 1890 show more than 100,000 Belgian firearms coming into the country during that time. The fit and finish wasn't as nice as the American originals, and they could jam in dusty conditions. Cowboys knew all that, but they carried them anyway, because having some kind of gun was better than having none at all. Belgian double-barreled shotguns from Liège were just as popular, maybe even more. These 12-gauge breech loaders had Damascus barrels, weighed 7 to 8 pounds, and cost about $10 instead of $20 for an American Remington. Wells Fargo messengers carried sawed-off Belgian shotguns on stagecoaches, and that's probably where the term coach gun got started. During the Lincoln County War in the late 1870s, Billy the Kid's gang used Belgian shotguns in ambushes because the wide spray of pellets was deadly up close. Number 3 is one of the strangest guns ever made, and it came from France. The Lamat grapeshot revolver was designed by Jean-Alexandre Lamat, who patented it in 1856. This beast held 9 rounds of .42 caliber ammo in a revolving cylinder. But underneath that cylinder was a separate smoothbore barrel that worked like a short shotgun, about 20 gauge. A lever on the hammer let the shooter switch back and forth between the revolver and the shotgun barrel, so one handgun basically gave you the power of 2 different weapons. The Lamat weighed about 3.5 pounds and had a 6 3/4 inch barrel, so it was big and heavy, no getting around that. Around 2,900 were made in France and Belgium. Most got smuggled through the Union naval blockade to arm confy, 8 officers during the Civil War. Confederate Cavalry General J.E.B. Stuart famously carried one. After the war ended in 1865, leftover Lamats made their way into the hands of Texas cowboys, New Mexico lawmen, and buffalo hunters who wanted versatile firepower. The shotgun barrel came in really handy against snakes or surprise attacks by groups on the plains. A cartridge version appeared in the 1870s, but most of the ones out west were still the old cap and ball models. The mechanism was complicated, and it fouled up easily from black powder residue. That was its biggest problem. But when it worked, the Lamat gave its owner more shots and more choices than almost any other gun around. 9 revolver rounds plus 1 shotgun blast from a single handgun was serious firepower for the time. Number 2 is another French invention that was way ahead of its time. Eugène Lefaucheux patented his pinfire revolver in 1854, and it was one of the very first handguns to use self-contained metallic cartridges instead of loose powder, a ball, and a separate percussion cap. The 12mm pinfire round had a little brass pin sticking out of the case that the hammer hit to fire it. That made reloading way faster than any percussion revolver. During the Civil War, about 14,000 Lefaucheux revolvers were bought for the military, and roughly 12,000 of them went to Union forces. The 6-shot gun had a 6-inch barrel, weighed about 2 pounds, and cost between $12 and $20 depending on the seller. A federal ordnance inspector said it tested accurate and reliable, even though American soldiers usually stuck with their familiar Colts and Remingtons. After the war, surplus Lefaucheux revolvers hit the civilian market and made it out to the western frontier through dealers in New Orleans and other port cities. French immigrants in California carried them, and miners in 1870s Arizona kept them for protection. The main drawback was that pinfire ammo wasn't easy to find in frontier towns. Plus, the sticking out pin could accidentally set off a round if the cartridge got bumped hard. Those problems kept the Lefaucheux from ever becoming as popular as Colt. Still, it deserves credit for helping push American guns toward the metallic cartridge era that became the standard. Every modern handgun cartridge owes a little something to that early French idea. Number 1 on the list comes from Spain, and it shows the pure money side of frontier life better than any other imported gun. Spain's Ibar region focused on copying popular American designs and selling them super cheap. Companies like Orbea Hermanos made knockoffs of the Smith Wesson Model 3 and the Colt single-action Army. These were chambered in .40-440, had 5 to 7-inch barrels, and held 6 shots. They sold for just $4 to $6, making them the cheapest centerfire handguns available to cowboys in the Southwest. They carried Spanish proof marks and often came into the U.S. through Mexico, where vaqueros and American cowboys traded along the border. One Orbea model even had a stamp saying Colt cartridges would fit, so everyone knew it worked with the most common ammo in the West. Billy the Kid might have carried a Spanish copy during some of his getaways. In the 1890s range wars, ranchers and hired hands on tight budgets relied on Ibar revolvers because they couldn't afford to spend 3 or 4 times as much on an American original. The quality was lower, the finish was rougher, and the steel wasn't always great, but they fired the same cartridges and did the job when it mattered. Later on, the Spanish firm Garate Anitua made the El Tigre, a .44-40 lever-action carbine based on the Winchester 1892, It had a 22-inch barrel, held 12 rounds, and weighed 8 pounds. It was made from 1915 to 1937, so it came after the classic Wild West period, but it grew out of those same frontier ideas. Many crossed the border during the Mexican Revolution when Pancho Villa's forces used them. American cowboys along the border picked them up for ranch work because they were cheap and used the same ammo as their revolvers. Hollywood later used El Tigres as props in Western movies since they looked close enough to real Winchesters and were a lot cheaper to buy. The guns of the Old West really came from all over the world, and that's one of the most overlooked parts of frontier life. Cowboys were practical. They bought whatever they could afford, whatever was sitting on the shelf at the general store or in the mail-order catalog, and whatever would keep them safe. European factories in Belgium, Britain, France, Germany, and Spain sent tens of thousands of firearms to fill the gap between what American companies could make and what the growing frontier actually needed. These imported guns armed everyone from cattle drovers earning $30 a month to famous outlaws we still talk about today. The frontier was a global mix of firepower, and that story needs to be told. Next time you watch a Western and see only Colts and Winchesters on the screen, remember that real cowboys carried guns with proof marks from Liège, Birmingham, Paris, and Ibar just as often. Point threes fast.